If you jump onto the topic of loving your enemies, in recent times you'll probably, if you Google it, you'll find a book by Arthur Brooks, a Catholic conservative professor who now teaches at Harvard, who recently wrote a book called Love Your Enemies. Brooks distills his thesis down to this in the epilogue. The important thing about contempt is that it is bad for us. Sometimes we don't like people who disagree with us, and we want to tell them they are idiots. And social media makes it easy to do, and pundits get rich by doing it. And maybe it seems that some of them deserve our contempt. But the important thing about contempt is that it is bad for us. Brooks's thesis is that the cure for contempt, and we do, I think it's inarguable, live among a culture of contempt, is not civility or tolerance, but it is love for one another. Civility or tolerance will never cure us, will never address what ails us, because there is no relationship, there is nothing worthy, sacred, or productive that survives based on mere civility and tolerance. If I were to say, friends, beloved church, I tolerate you, you'd say, it's time for you to look for another job. If I turned to you and said, the moment I knew she was the one was when she said, oh, Dave, I tolerate you too. We live in a culture of many things, indifference on the one hand, more on that later, and contempt on the other. It's easy to see everything through the lens of contempt. It's easy to participate in contempt precisely because contempt for another is a dopamine-inducing drug, lavishing disgust on others and their ideas. Many of us are loath to admit that it excites us. It makes us feel powerful and dominant and intelligent. It's so much more pronounced, of course, to be able to do it anonymously, that sense of power. When we can mutter to ourselves in our living rooms or behind keyboards or sit on a bus, plane, or train with an iPhone and believe that as we sit among others in the same kind of seat, traveling to the same destination, wearing similar clothes, holding similar devices, that it is we who are kings and queens of the castle because we are able to scoff at the sheer stupidity and recklessness of what we might think of as pretty much anyone who disagrees with us. Let's be real for a moment. On any given night in America, the most popular conservative and progressive TV shows, Tucker Carlson and Rachel Maddow, have about 3 million viewers, which is a lot of people. And also, that is less than 1% of the American population who is watching Tucker Carlson or Rachel Maddow on a Wednesday night, less than 1%. But like any drug use, what follows the high is an emptiness. The knowledge that our dunking on someone, our loathing someone, our dismay and disgust didn't do one key thing, which is ever change anyone else's mind. And in response to that emptiness, if we don't face up to the truth of it all, if we don't have a moment of clarity, then we need to replace that dopamine surge, or we will have a need for that dopamine again and again and again. You can opt out, of course. Easier said than done for many. You can choose not to dunk on people and not to snicker at their stupidity and not trawl for trash. You don't have to attend every fight that you're invited to. That is a key lesson I am constantly preaching in my family these days. Guess what, kids? You don't have to attend every fight that you're invited to. And I tell you what, I am telling myself that as much as I am telling them. You don't even have to attend every debate you're invited to. It's important to share ideas. It's important to participate in the marketplace of ideas, but contempt, that's something else. Jesus says to us, if you do good to those who do good to you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners do the same. But love your enemies. course, when it comes to enemies, most of us aren't stuck on a boat with someone we loathe for days on end. This past summer, my son Ben, who's now 13, spent 10 days on a sailboat off the coast of Maine as a part of Outward Bound. The thing with boats is that they're quite hard to leave when you're not right next to the land. And Penobscot Bay is quite cold no matter what time of year you think about swimming in it. Ben thought about swimming in it this summer. Shortly after picking him up from the end of the program, he told me about the challenges of dealing with another student. Ben, like many kids his age, feels quite strongly about vaccination. Among the group, among the students, everyone was vaccinated except for one person. The group of 10 boys and 3 instructors had to be tested 5 times during the course of their 10-day trip because there was one person, one student, who was unvaccinated in their midst. The student was quite unapologetic about this inconvenience. Protocols indicated that at certain times during the trip, masks must be worn, but the one unvaccinated student was the one who made the biggest deal about wearing his mask. This student also prayed regularly. He had a crucifix around his neck, and he wore a particular kind of red hat all the time on the boat. Now, I'm just saying that mature adults might reference a marketplace of ideas in the world and how it's important to engage people who think differently from us to understand their points of view. And then there's being on a boat for 10 days in Penobscot Bay with someone whose family life not just seems very different to you, but is in fact creating nuisances for the rest of the group, including telling the rest of the group that his family thinks this and that, and Ben found it especially grating. Those nuisances that were created felt like choices that one family made, not hardships that might engender more sympathy. So I asked Ben this week, as I reflected on this passage, to share this dialogue with his permission. Ben, did you love this other boy? Did you get along with this other boy? Not really. Did he get on your nerves? Yes. Often? All the time. Are you friends now? Were you able to overcome the obstacles in your relationship and spark a new friendship? Not at all. If you had the chance to hang out with him again, would you? What do you think, Dad? What do you make of Jesus' urging the disciples to love their enemies? Sounds hard, but it sounds like a way of encouraging us to think about the role of forgiveness in life. Do you think of this other boy as your enemy? No. He wasn't an enemy. We just didn't get along. That right there, for me, was a critical part of that dialogue. He wasn't an enemy. We just didn't get along. I find it telling that a 13-year-old would not, even after being stuck on a boat for 10 days with someone with whom he vehemently disagreed, he would not define that person as an enemy. We just didn't get along. There's shades and degrees of enemy, and there's shades and degrees of love, and how you see this text probably depends on where you sit. Ben does not have a Twitter account, and he does not watch Tucker Carlson or Rachel Maddow, and he doesn't pour through the newspaper every morning. The situation on the boat was irritating, a nuisance, but in the end, it didn't create any direct harm. He was not actually hurt by being on the boat. As has been documented through the years, and I assure you, if you haven't been here regularly, I haven't actually talked about this for months. I enjoy a good bike ride. As I have also said from time to time, car drivers, automobile drivers, they yell at you sometimes. Usually, it is a younger driver who has the window open who yells something at you. And often enough, there is someone else in the passenger seat or the back seat or both, and they are trying to impress that person who is in the car with them. It's not really a big deal to me. Occasionally, an older driver who is alone will yell something out the window, and that troubles me more. Not that any 17-year-old should yell things out the window, but you should have grown out of it by the time you get to 22. Now, I don't think of drivers as my enemy when I'm riding my bike. I drive a car from time to time myself. I never remember the 99-point-something% of people who pass me, who give me a bit of room. 4 feet is the law in New Jersey as of August of this year, just a little PSA for you. But I tend to focus on the minuscule number of people who pass so closely that I can feel the air ripple, pushing my front wheel to the side, the breeze on my cheek, the gritting of my teeth as I try to concentrate on what I'm doing next rather than what just happened. And last year, as some of you know, I was put in the hospital by someone who passed me so closely that I had to turn my wheel to the right. I clipped a rock and I slid down the hill on Normal Avenue on my side. I stopped in the opposite lane. Who knows what would have happened if a car had been coming up the hill the other way. I went to the hospital at Stacy's insistence to make sure my head was okay. It was, I think, and had some cuts and scrapes that healed. Are drivers my enemy? Of course not. I don't get along with them sometimes. Was that driver my enemy? That person whose recklessness and haste left me with scars on my leg, and perhaps even worse in my mind, scratches on my bike. I did actually think, as blood trickled down my leg, my shoulder, and my arm, oh God, is my bike okay? I joke because joking keeps me away from the more pointed question that Ben raised. The encouragement to love enemies forces us into a reckoning about our own capacity to forgive. The driver, his face is etched in my memory. His partner telling something as he speeds past. I look over incredulous at the recklessness and the indifference. It was as if I was never there in the first place. I'm sure Ben is right. I'm sure we ought to do a better job of defining an enemy. Someone with whom you have a big disagreement, who creates nuisances, is that an enemy? Someone whose recklessness causes you an injury, is that an enemy? If it is only a one-time event rather than a repeated assault on your value as a human? And this is where my own anecdotes have to end. Privileged, white, straight, male guy? I have no idea. I have no clue. I can only read stories from other people's point of view as you track from people who are nuisances to people who cause you harm to people who cause systematic harm. On the spectrum of enemies, love, and forgiveness. I can only understand parts of Jesus urging the disciples, both of what an enemy is and what love is and what forgiveness looks like. By listening, by reading, by thinking. And so on that spectrum, we get to the other end. In The Sunflower, Simon Wiesenthal writes of an incident during the time that he was an inmate in a concentration camp. His work detail was sent to clean medical waste at an army hospital for wounded soldiers, German soldiers. On the way, he says, our column suddenly came to a halt at a crossroads. I could see nothing that might be holding us up, but I noticed on the left of the street there was a military cemetery, and on each grave there was planted a sunflower. I stared, spellbound. Suddenly I felt deep within me an envy for dead soldiers. Each had a sunflower to connect him with the living world and butterflies to visit his grave. For me, there would be no sunflower. I would be buried in a mass grave. No sunflower would ever bring light into my darkness. No butterflies would dance above my tomb. His work group arrived at the hospital. As they worked, a nurse came up to Simon and asked him, are you a Jew? And he answered yes. So she took him into the hospital building to the bedside of a 21-year-old dying soldier named Carl. Carl's head was covered in bandages with openings only for his mouth, nose, and ears. Carl told Simon, I know that at this moment thousands of men are dying. Death is everywhere. It's neither infrequent nor extraordinary. I'm resigned to dying soon, but before that, I want to talk about an experience which is torturing me. Otherwise, I cannot die in peace. I must tell you of this horrible deed. Tell you because you are a Jew. Carl talked about his childhood and described himself as a happy, dreamy child. His father was a social democrat. His mother brought him up as a Catholic. Carl joined the Hitler Youth, volunteered for the SS. That was the last time his father spoke to him. He went on to tell Simon about being sent to fight in Russia and about one day coming to a village, and he describes committing the most awful atrocities, the killing of innocent people, the deaths of Jewish children held in their parents' arms. And so he says to Simon, Carl says to Simon, I lie here waiting for death. The pains in my body are terrible, but worse still is my conscience. I cannot die. In the last hours of my life, you are with me. I don't know who you are. I only know that you're a Jew, and that's enough. In the long nights while I've been waiting for death, time and time again, I've longed to talk about it to a Jew and beg forgiveness. Only I didn't know whether there were any Jews left. I know that what I'm asking is too much for you, but without your answer, I cannot die in peace. Simon left the room without a word. When his group returned to the hospital the next day, the same nurse came to Simon and told him that Carl had died. Over the next years of the war, time and again, through all his suffering, Simon thought of Carl and wondered if he should have forgiven him. Ought I? He asks. Was my silence right or wrong? The crux of the matter is, of course, the question of forgiveness. Forgetting is something that time alone takes care of. Forgiveness is an act of volition. In this story, of course, is absent from the equation is whether another is actually an enemy. For surely he is. Now it's only the love part of Jesus' instruction that remains. What does it mean? Does he have the capacity to love in that way? To forgive in that way? No matter who we are or where we are on life's journey, we have enemies of varying stripes. And we also have the capacity to love and forgive in different ways. Can we ever love our neighbors truly? All of them? As we love ourselves? I'll pick it up from here next week. Peace be with you.